I'm excited to talk to you today about what a next web could look like, and also why that's not set in stone. And the reason I want to talk to you about this today is that there has been a lot to do about Web3 on social media and on the web, and also in the real world with people putting lots of money towards that and investors getting really excited. And I just want to make the point today that there are actually lots of exciting uses for the web and problems outside the realm of Web3 that also are worthy of our attention. So with that out of the way, my name is Hidde. As Miguel mentioned, I am a front-end developer and accessibility specialist. And you can follow me on Twitter at HTV, or I have a blog as well. That's hidde.blog. You can subscribe to that and stuff like that if you want to. But I'm here to talk to you about the web, and I want to take you first back to the World Wide Web, which was kind of the first iteration of the web when it was kind of first invented. And that takes us all the way back to March 1983. Tim Berners-Lee worked at CERN, which is that institute where they do physics research. They have the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva. And he was working there. And at some point, he had some idle time and spent it to make a proposal to make it easier to manage documents. He figured out that there was often the need to find some document, and it would be residing on some computer somewhere in the building. And he had to go to the physical machine, find the information, and he wondered whether it would be a better thing if he could actually access that information through some kind of web. So it was available on different computers, and he wanted to make a way to access it remotely somehow. So he wrote this proposal that he called Information Management, somewhat boring title, and he submitted that to his manager, Mike Sandel, who wrote famously these 3 words on there: vague but exciting. So he was moderately excited, I'll say, and I think that just ended up in a drawer somewhere until a couple of months later it circulated again. And some people within CERN got excited about this proposal and started to do more work on it and kind of gather people, gather budget, and work on it a bit more. Now, in 1990, that resulted in formulating 3 basic ideas that still underpin the web: HTML, URI, and HTTP. So HTML is the markup language that we use to mark up content. It's basically what makes that the web isn't a plain text kind of thing, but that we actually have richer web pages with things like headings and lists and images, links, important things that we need a language for. The URI, a way to access content with an address. It's a uniform resource identifier, as Tim Berners-Lee calls it, and at the W3C it's still called that. Many others will just call it URL, a resource locator. It's a similar thing. And then there's HTTP, which is what describes how kind of documents are transferred and how all of that works. So HTML, URI, and HTTP were invented at the time, and they still underpin the current web. Now, what's kind of revolutionary about all this is that history could have gone 2 ways. It could have become a commercial enterprise of Berners-Lee Limited, where we all had to kind of pay fees and ask permission to make it onto the web. But they decided and convinced the CERN management to actually make the code available and do that royalty-free. So Tim Berners-Lee said on the FAQ that you can find on his webpage, had the technology been proprietary and in my total control, it would probably not have taken off. You can't propose that something is universal space and at the same time keep control of it. So he realized that early on and made it available and convinced the management of CERN to make it available openly without royalties so that we can now all enjoy web technology. A year later, he moved to MIT in Boston, from Geneva to Boston, where the Worldwide Web Consortium was founded, the W3C. And it still has a similar slogan. The WWDC wants to realize the full potential of the web. And having worked there, I know from our team meetings that involves a lot of different things. It's not just HTML and CSS and what happens there, but it's standards in all sorts of different areas that where web technology gets used and where it may need to be used in the future. Lots of stuff gets explored there. And what's an important aspect, I think, is that a lot of web technologies are formulated in so-called web standards. And web standards are really important because they ensure that all these different systems that work with the web work in the same way. At least they try to ensure that. This wasn't the case when the web first came out, and it wasn't the case 10 years later either, because there were lots of different web browsers that displayed content in slightly different ways, and sometimes they had features that were different. That's still somewhat the case, but the web of today is a lot more interoperable than it had been at the start. So web standards make sure that web browsers, but also authoring tools that create web content, devices that use the web, like fridges and cars and whatever you can imagine that uses the web, websites themselves, and they all kind of have a common understanding of what web technology looks like, what expectations are, and that they're all on the same page. And that's extremely helpful, and it makes that we can use the web on so many different devices, and then it is somewhat easy to build for the web, somewhat. So yeah, this was important because sometimes websites just would only work in one browser, and that is not great. And still, it happens sometimes when a browser will ship technology that isn't in other browsers, but it's kind of at a minimum now, where that was a lot worse before. Now, web standards are also great because they ensure, at least in the way that they work at the W3C and other organizations, that the web is made with diverse inputs and that a lot of different people can contribute to the web, lots of different stakeholders. If you're excited about that, Rachel Andrew has a great blog post about how the W3C works and how you can contribute to it too. So that's the web when it was invented. And there was a point where people started talking about Web 2.0. Web 2.0 was something that people suddenly started talking about. When I started working on the web, this was kind of already going on and started to become a bigger thing. And Web 2.0 was coined in 1999 by a UX consultant. She wrote about it first in something called Print Magazine, ironically. And she wrote about kind of how Web 2.0, this new thing, would compare to the old thing, Web 1.0. She explained it as, we had Pong and we are going to have the Matrix. It is going to be hugely different. And now that the infrastructure was in place, this new web is going to change everything because we will be using this existing infrastructure in very exciting new ways. So she talked about how the old web was mostly like static pages and how the new web could be more seen like a transport mechanism through which interactivity happens. So a lot more interactive web pages that interact with each other in a really exciting way. So that's, I think, a really cool thing to actually look back to, this article. I've linked it on the slides webpage that I'll be sharing later so that you can read it too. It's a PDF file. Ironically, it's not on the web, but this article describes the future of the web in a very early time in 1999. It talks about how the web would eventually appear on your TV, on your car dashboard, on your cell phone, handheld machines, whatever they are, and also your microwave. And I think we can now say in 2022 that actually all of these places can actually have web technology built into them. I don't personally have a microwave that's connected to the web, but I think that exists. At least I know fridges with web technology exist. So, it's about using that existing web technology in different ways. The same technology like HTTP used in more places in more exciting ways. And I think that description that she did in that article is quite nice. And it really describes like, this is how we can make the web better and use it in more interesting ways. Years later, Web 2.0 got further popularized by a publisher who kept calling it web as a platform. And platforms came about lots of different platforms where people were supposed to contribute their own content. So where websites were static before, people would write documents and put them online. This was all about websites where you could create content together with other people, like comment on each other's stuff, upload your own photos and videos, short texts. You can share bookmarks on websites like YouTube and Flickr and Twitter. Some of these are still around. Delicious was a really cool place where you could like share links that you found on the web. Kind of one of the most important things on the web is links. So that was really cool. All of these things could kind of be described by different buzzwords. There wasn't one clear definition of Web 2.0. Preparing this talk, I saw an interview with Tim O'Reilly, that publisher I mentioned earlier, who said, "Oh, I don't really do definitions." But what he did do is like describe a lot of different bits of technology that would underpin Web 2.0, and that's how I'm going to describe Web 2.0 to you. There's a lot of different things that are properties of this Web 2.0. So one is user-generated content, as I mentioned before. So people writing content on these platforms. So these are websites that didn't have any content themselves, but relied on users to provide that content. It also included like review websites and stuff like that. Another big phenomenon in Web 2.0 was software as a service. We still do that quite a lot. So platforms that would offer software as a service, folksonomy, where users would be tasked with creating taxonomies. So tagging different photos and different videos, saying like, here's a video that is about cats, not about dogs. And then relying on users to make sure that all the cat videos were properly categorized. That was a big thing in Web 2.0. Open APIs were a big thing, so you would be able to include your last 5 tweets on your own homepage. That's a lot harder these days because the open APIs of the time are now all run by platforms that have become more like walled gardens. But still, open APIs were a thing. They're still a thing in some platforms. And then there were lots of like widgets where you could include parts of websites on your own websites and kind of mesh up different parts of websites. Now, Tim Berners-Lee talked about this in an interview and said, Web 2.0 is, of course, a piece of jargon. Nobody ever understands what it means, or nobody even understands what it means. So that's what he said about it. I think if you look at all the different characteristics and kind of look back at what the web was at the time, a picture emerges, and there are kind of commonalities between websites that emerged at the time. And a lot of the Web 2.0 stuff is still around, but in a slightly different shape. Like the gardens have become a bit more walled compared to what they were at the time. And that brings me to the next stage, or at least what some people want to propose is the next stage. And I'm putting it in air quotes because I don't think groups of people should be naming new versions of the web. Like there are no version numbers, at least the W3C or other organizations, they don't release new versions of the web. This is entirely because a community believes this exists. So Web3 was something coined in 2014 by the inventor of a blockchain technology. Web 3.0, with a space between 3.0 and web, already existed before. Tim Berners-Lee talked about it in 2006 and named it the semantic web. That didn't take off as much as he hoped. So it was coined at the time. It is coined again, but without the 0.0 and without the space, weirdly, between web and 3. So what's 3.0? What's Web 3? It is, again, just like Web 2, more like a marketing term, an umbrella term for a bunch of different technologies, which some people refer to as the future of the web. It's an umbrella term for different properties that people like, a vision of the web that largely runs on the blockchain in order to make owning assets better for people, better in air quotes, owning in air quotes as well, who create them. So the assets are created by people, and it's somehow supposed to make it easier for other people to own these digital assets by cutting out middlemen. So the buzzwords are decentralized, transparent, blockchain, immutable, creators, and scarcity. And I think this is really impressive when people talk about it. And when they first did it, I didn't understand what they were talking about. I was quite impressed hearing about this stuff, but I think it's important to ask questions about, what all of this is and if it really makes a lot of sense. In the next few slides, I will be drawing on what the work other people did and the articles other people wrote. And I'll be sharing the links later on so you can read them at your own leisure. But you could ask things like, is it really decentralized, as Molly White did in a brilliant recent article? A lot of the Web3 APIs and wallets and exchanges are actually central entities. And if they're not even, then they're still often run on central services like Google or AWS. You could also ask if they're really transparent. The blockchain might be transparent, like everyone can go to the blockchain and figure out how transactions happen and when and how and what they are. But it requires a deep technical knowledge that I don't think regular users of the web actually have. And there are things on the web that are transparent that aren't so clear to those people either, like websites that have a little lock in front of them because they are served via HTTPS. Many people don't understand how to verify who has signed these signatures and how to figure out if a website is really the website you are looking for. Like a bank's website, let's say ing.nl or ing.iamahacker.something else might really look like that webpage. It is not. And it's really hard for regular users of the web to actually figure out about this. So the transparency properties of the current web are hard to use. And I think that's still the case for blockchain-based technologies. It might be even a little harder because there's a lot of technological stuff there that requires deep knowledge that people might not have. So the transparency might not be of as much value to those people. You could also ask if it's really immutable. Exchanges are able to freeze assets, which they've sometimes proven to do, or they can do a hard reset when they are hacked. This has also happened. And the freezing has happened when someone's apes were stolen and stuff like that. Molly White describes this in her recent article. You could also ask if it's immutable in the sense that someone could make an NFT that is changing based on who views it. So an NFT points to a picture, and what the picture is actually not something that is fixed. What the picture is it lives on a URL, and anyone who knows anything about the web knows that what's on a URL is controlled by the person running the server that serves that URL, right? And it can listen to headers and serve different things based on what the headers say, which is what Moxie Marlinspike, the founder of the Signal app, has done. He's made an NFT that looks different based on whether it's served on OpenSea or Rarible or looked at in a wallet. It actually served as a pile of poo there. Is it really going to protect creators? Another question you could ask. And I think it's not got a great track record when it comes to protecting creators. Anyone can create NFTs, even of stuff that's not theirs. There's no checks for, do you own the copyright? Are you the person who you say you are? And artists are actually seeing their work showing up in NFTs that they didn't mint themselves. That's something that The Verge wrote recently, and there's a lot of examples in the article that I'm sharing here. You could also wonder whether it's really going to protect creators in the sense that royalties are not actually defined in the standard, quote unquote, that describes how non-fungible tokens are how they fit on the Ethereum blockchain. So royalties are not defined there. One of the things that are claimed to be the most important parts of what this whole thing is about. And then something else you could wonder when it's about protecting creators and making it great for artists is, does paying artists more money actually require this technology? Can't we just transfer the money? And I know in the US, transferring small amounts of money is hard, but I know across Europe that I can transfer amounts as small as 1 euro cent to anywhere in Europe within seconds, because that is something that actually exists in Europe. So, and it's not a new thing either. I remember 15 years ago that I could transfer money with internet banking that way without fees. Is there really scarcity? Another question to ask, I think. When you buy an NFT, the only thing that's really scarce is the unique hash. Look it up if you don't believe me. Another thing to look at is who's hyping this. And what I'm finding is that a lot of people hyping it, or everyone hyping it, as far as I've been able to find out, is actually people who have an interest in this because they've invested in it or because it will personally enrich them if more people get into crypto or more people get into Web3. It's fine, things that enrich people. I enrich myself too. I have a business, and I charge money for the services that I do. I have not much against capitalism so much. Just I don't like it as an argument for Web3 because people say that Web3 is going to make things better, and it isn't if this is all about your own wallet. Now, there are a lot of reasons mentioned in this article called The Third Web that that I recommend you to look up that go into all sorts of different reasons why people look into Web3 technologies. But none of them are actually things that are better for society. They're all things that make sense for personally for people. Another article that I found interesting called The Web3 Fraud also underlies that Web3 only exists to hide the underlying cryptocurrencies. So the actual utility that these systems have is already available in other systems that don't rely on the blockchain. Now, as a philosopher, and I'm a philosopher turned technologist, I want to see arguments. I want to see proper arguments that don't rely on just, this is good for myself. So I want to see how this is actually helping people, because I don't think we have to make everything about money. Some of us just want to use the web to access information securely, accessibly, and with minimal privacy impact. I think that's important, and I think we've got to make sure that Web3 doesn't just create problems, and it also solves actual problems that we can all agree are real problems and aren't solved better by current technology. So basically, Web3 needs skeptics, and I can recommend you to look at the website called web3isgoinggreat.com. And it also links out to a list of a Twitter list that you can follow and find some other skeptics there. So what is an exciting future for the web? I think there are a bunch of different things that are exciting about the web and things that I like to see going forward and that I am excited about. And I invite you all to be excited about these other things that are also futures of the web that don't rely on blockchain and that are actually solving real problems. Like, I want to see a web with better styles. And 2022 is going to bring a lot of updates to CSS. It is the year of CSS, and it's going to bring lots of exciting things, as you can find in this article from Bramus van Damme. I want to see a web with easier web payments, and the Web Payments API, or the Web Payment Request API, I should say, is a really exciting step in that direction. I want to see a web that has easy and safe authentication. And there are lots of cool companies that work in that space. There's also a government ID system that we have in the Netherlands called Hidde that actually works really well because you can log in with this through lots of different or almost all of the Dutch government layers, including your own city, including the central government, including the tax office. So all of these can be logged in with this one system that actually works really well and has lots of good accessibility features too. I want to see a web with more art too. There's a bunch of Dutch museums that have put on their entire collection on the web, and you can look at it in high resolution. And some of these, like Rijksmuseum, actually invite you to create prints and derivative works from these high resolution images. So that's a cool way to use the web, I think, that actually solves a real problem. We all need more art in our lives. And this is real art, not monkeys and apes. Then I like to see a web with more personal sites. I invite you to look at personalsite.es, which has a list of lots of cool websites that people created themselves where they actually own their own content without putting it on the blockchain. So basically, my gist here today is that the next web isn't set in stone. There are lots of interesting challenges and lots of interesting plans that go way beyond those that are posed by the Web3 crowd. So yeah, there are lots of unsolved problems like the lack of web accessibility or Facebook's business model. And there are also lots of cool plans that solve these problems, including legislation, including new web standards that are much better than what the Web3 crowd is proposing and kind of trying to force upon us. So wrapping up, I want to say that we've come a very long way since the invention of the web. Lots of cool things are happening on the web, lots of exciting developments. I want to tell you that Web3 isn't what it seems and invite you to do a bit of research into that. I'm sharing the article, so have a look at those. And lastly, I want to say that there isn't one set of plans and challenges for the future of the web. There's a lot of different ways that we can improve the web. And I invite you to look at all of these and think about what you think are the biggest problems in society, and figure out how we can use the web to solve them. Because the web is an amazing place, and it can solve a lot of problems for us. So let's be critical of what the problems are we're trying to solve, and also how we solve those problems. Thanks very much for listening. I have my slides up on talks.hidde, which I'll be tweeting out later at HDV as well.
Fantastic.